Hello and welcome back to the channel. So teaching myself to animate is a long process. I figured a logical place to start would be learning a little bit about what animation is, what it means, and maybe a bit about the history of it, who the first animators were, and hopefully that's interesting. Today, to do that, we will be looking at pre-industrial animation. So what happened before the things that we consider to be classic animation? What were the first trailblazers, the first ideas, the first things people tried out that were the kind of first trials in the field of animation? So firstly, the definition. What is animation? What does the word mean? So the dictionary defines animation as the process of making films, videos, and computer games in which drawings, models, or images of people and animals seem to move. Now, I think the key thing in there is the last words. It says it seems to move. So it's this idea of an illusion, this idea of creating a still image and making it seem like it's moving. So we're going to focus a lot on that idea of illusion because I think that's a really interesting thing that sort of links up a lot of the early aspects of pre-industrial animation. And that illusion obviously is created by a series of images, a series of still images played in quick succession, and when played in succession they trick your brain, they trick your eye, and they create this illusion of movement, of things going from one point to another and time travelling. And I think another thing that is worth considering with the ideas of early animation is we're so used to seeing things animated. It's so ubiquitous in society. Every billboard, every thing on the TV, everything on your computer, on your phone, all has animation built in, and we're not surprised when we see it. It's such a big part of our lives. But imagine what it would be like in a world without that. Imagine seeing those illusions for the first time. Imagine seeing a drawing come to life and start moving across a projection or a screen or something like that. It would seem like magic, like a spell. But ultimately, that process of animation is about creating a representation of your imagination. It's about being able to take something that's weird and wacky and wonderful and make it seem lifelike, bring those dreams and thoughts to reality and share them with other people. So it's a form of storytelling, and that's the same now as it ever was. So we're familiar with animation now, we know what it is, we know what it's defined as, but what were its early origins? Where did it start? What were the first animators? When I was researching this, it was tricky to find an origin point, but one thing I read which I thought was fascinating was about cave paintings in southern France. These first sort of prehistoric paintings on the walls of caves. You get a real sense that these caves would have been dark, they would have been impossible to see without fire. So these people would climb deep down into these caves for shelter from animals and the weather, and would create scenes on these walls of horses and buffalo and all sorts of animals that were roaming around that they would be hunting for or just observing. And what's striking about these images is that they're often multiple images of the same creature in 3 or 4 different stages of movement. The legs being in slightly different arrangements, or their manes being sort of blown behind them. And often these images are sort of layered on top of each other and they're sort of all muddled together. There's not sort of a clear, crisp image of a horse in the middle of this blank wall. There's lots going on. And I think that's a real sign of this illusion of movement. I think that thing of showing an animal with its legs in an action pose is maybe not strictly animation, but it shows that even our earliest ancestors were trying to create this illusion of movement, that they didn't want to just create a flat image, they wanted to bring it to life. And I can't help thinking that you imagine sitting in this dark cave and these images are daubed on the wall and you're there contemplating them by firelight, flickering, creating shapes and patterns on the wall as it flickers away. And that again would also help enhance that feeling of movement, of that bringing the image to life, of making the images that you draw on seem more dynamic and creating that illusion that I think is probably the precursor to animation as we know it now, in my opinion. And so these paintings were made in 15,000 BCE, and that's an enormous amount of time that's passed. Some of the earliest examples of humans making an impact on their environment. So not only is that the earliest sign of any type of animation, but it's the first sign of anything that humans have done. But when did animation start as we more traditionally know it? So there were these things in the 19th century pre-industrial Britain called magic lantern shows, where they would depict images onto film and project them onto the walls. Now, these images didn't move, they weren't animations, they weren't more than one frame, but they would add lights to them, they would move the projector around, they would project other things over the top of them, make all these sort of strange light shows, and use that to tell a story, to have a narrative and create the illusion of movement. Having that action, having that dynamism was a form of entertainment. And at the time, this would have seemed amazing. You have all these walls around you, a crowd in the middle, and these images being projected, and they used what they called thaumatropes, which are these colourful reflective cards essentially that they would bounce light off and allow colours to dance around on the walls. But then in terms of more frame by frame animation, the first would have been the thaumatrope, which you've probably seen, quite common kids' toys. It's a disc of card or paper with an image on each side, and they're spun together, creating this strobing effect between the two images. And although it doesn't depict movement, it does create an illusion. It creates what the common one is a bird in a cage, and as you flip it, the bird appears to be in the cage. And that's really the first attempt at tricking the human eye and making it seem like two images become one. And so that thing of having a card that flips over one on top of the other is then quickly developed into flip books. The idea of having successive images, frames we'll call them, on each page, and when they're flicked through you get that illusion of movement. And so you have this guy John Linnett from Warwickshire in England who invents or patents this flip book, naming it the kinograph, and uses it as a method to illustrate adventures and tales. Even though they're quick and only last a few seconds each, they are the start of a process. So in pretty quick succession after the invention of the flipbook, you have a series of different inventors and mathematicians creating what was then called the Zoetrope, which translates as the wheel of life. And you may have seen these. It's a black cylinder of card with a series, normally 12 images drawn on the inside of it, and a series of 12 slots cut in the outside of black cylinder. When you spin it, you look through these slots and it tricks your eye into seeing each of the images in quick succession, and this creates an animation. And because it's a cylinder, once it rotates, it goes back to the beginning and you get a repetitive animation. And I think this is a real interesting step in the development of animation, because if you imagine a disc with images, but if you cut the middle of that loop, extend those two ends out and stretch it, put one end around a spool, put the other around a spool, and play it all the way through, that's your first ever film. If you paint those images onto something that you can pass light through, then you have film. And about 50 years after the invention of the zoetrope in the 1830s, that's exactly what Charles-Émile Renaud did. He extended the zoetrope out and put a spool on each end and created the first film. It's not often thought of as being the first film because it didn't use photographs, it used drawings. But his films were projected onto screens and had a storyline and were the first recognisable modern animation. And that really opened the floodgates. In the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, you have a huge movement. As soon as industrial processes become easy to develop, these entertainment processes became more common, and before you know it, you've got proper animation. Now, that post-industrial thing we're going to look at in another video. But that idea of a zoetrope I think is fascinating. I think that's the first important device. And so in my next episode, I'm going to try and make a zoetrope from scratch. I'll show you along the way so that you can make one yourself. It will be my first attempt at actually animating something, because I have to create that 12 frame looping animation to actually make the thing work. So that'd be a funny thing to try out. So I hope you found that interesting. Thanks very much for watching. Follow along, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and we'll see you next time.